There are a lot of advantages to growing up in a foreign country, especially in Zambia, Central Africa, where it was a blessing to be the son of a missionary couple and spend 10 very formative years of my life. One of those advantages is one of the ones perhaps you've seen on TV, whether it was watching National Geographic or something else, is that we had the opportunity to go to national game reserves live and get in a Land Rover and do game safaris. And so the warden would take us, the game warden, through these miles and miles of trekking paths and getting to see all the big animals in their natural habitats. Now, the one thing it'll do, it'll ruin you for ever going to a zoo again, I can assure you of that. But nonetheless, we'd come up upon a herd of gazelle. And I don't know if it was in the hundreds, but certainly more than 100. And we were sitting there just kind of watching, and the game warden said, "Don't anybody move." He said, "I want you to look very slowly over your left shoulder to the left rear wheel of the Land Rover." And when we did, there we saw about 280 to 300 pounds of a tan-skinned, muscular, frighteningly rigid, poised to jump lioness. She was using the Land Rover for cover. She was using us to hide behind while she viewed the flock, the herd, to see which would be her target. We sat there for 2 hours, nobody moving, barely breathing, sweat pouring down, and then bam! All of a sudden, some of you woke up right when I did that. She leapt in what felt like or seemed like visually to be 20 yards. I know it wasn't, but this power all in one movement, and we sat there and watched her in this frantic chase and make the kill. It was the most amazing thing you could ever see in your life. What I'll never forget, other than that scene, was what the warden said. The gazelle wakes up every day knowing it must run faster than the lion or it will become the lion's meal. The lion wakes up every day knowing it must run faster than the gazelle or it will starve. Here's the point. He said, so it doesn't matter if you're the lion or the gazelle. When the sun comes up, you better be running. I wonder this idea about this particular beatitude, when I think about animals and their instinct to survive, they are driven by their next meal and where they will find something to quench their thirst. It's an instinct for survival. I mean, they have to do this, and yet, well, wait a minute, so do we. But as I look at this beatitude here, oh, how close to the heart of God, oh, how your life will be enlarged. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Well, let's camp there for just a moment, because if, in all honesty, I can say to you in all honesty, in thinking about my 58 years of life, never has there been a time where hunger nor thirst was a state of being for me. No. I've been hungry and I've been thirsty, but it wasn't a state of being. It wasn't like I was sitting around wondering, where will my next meal come from? Where am I ever going to find water to quench this thirst? And so I began to say to myself, this is not really a state of being for us in humanity. And yet, in the time of Jesus' day, in the day of Palestine, a working man's salary was really the equivalent of 3 pennies a day. Meat might have been eaten maybe once a week. The norm was for many men and women to live on the edge of starvation. So to me, that kind of institutes this thought that there is this moment in his listeners' ears. They would have known immediately when he said hunger. And about thirst, well, they didn't have a faucet they could go over and turn over in one's home, and sometimes not even readily available close by. It might require a hike of miles. You add to that the heat, you add to that the dust storms, and you can imagine the normal thirst level would increase exponentially to this point of being parched. Now, if you've ever been hungry or you've ever been parched, you know your stomach growls. There's no doubt about that. Be listening for your neighbor today. I bet it'll happen before we're done. But without explanation, his listeners would have known exactly what he's talking about. When he said those who hunger and thirst, they knew immediately they needed no explanation. So what's the difference for you and for me then? Because my my strong, educated guess is we're not worried about where the next meal's coming from. We can get up from this very place and go and find something to drink and parch our thirst or to quench our thirst for sure. So what's he talking about here? Well, the closest idea might be that we have a craving, a deep desire for something, a kind of a drive, a strong drive. It might be a yearning, it might be a longing, it might even be an ache for something on the inside. And so it would read, oh, how near to the heart of God, oh, how large your life will be if you crave righteousness. Well, I don't know about you, but sometimes I find that all I have to do is smell food and I get hungry. You know what I'm talking about? It's not like I'm walking around thinking I'm hungry, but then I smell something and I think, I'm hungry all of a sudden. Reminds me of the sitcom in the 1970s called MASH, M-A-S-H. Many of you remember that. Stood for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. And it was about a group of men and women trying to make sense out of their deployment to the 407th MASH unit in the Korean War. And there was one character named Major Winchester. Now, Major Winchester, it was funny and sad because here he was a hospital surgeon, but he didn't like dealing with death or dying or horrors or anything like that. He tried to sanitize the conditions, if you will. And in this particular episode, he had been wondering about heaven. He was wondering about what was happening to all these soldiers who were dying and perhaps what would happen to him. And so there's the issue at hand. And so as this particular episode goes on, it finds Major Winchester at the front line in the triage unit. The triage unit meaning when the helicopters would come in with the wounded from the field, they had to put them in priority order. Who's worse off than the others? So they need to get help quickly, and so it's called a triage unit. And Major Winchester's making these decisions. And so as he leans over one soldier, this soldier grabs him by the hand and pulls him down and says, I'm dying. I'm dying, Doc, and I'm afraid. And with that, Major Winchester, in this moment of kind of selfishness, he leans in and says, tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. And this dying soldier says, I don't see anything. I don't see anything. And then all of a sudden, something happens. There is this calm that comes to this very tense body of this wounded soldier. There's a calmness and a peace and almost a half smile. And he says, I don't see anything, but I smell the bread. I smell the bread. And you can see the look on Major Winchester's face. What is he talking about? But there's a whole story behind this if you think about the verse in John 6:35 where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not hunger. Indeed, he who believes in me shall not thirst. But this soldier is dying and Major Winchester stays close to him and all he can say is, I smell the bread. I smell the bread. It is the last words out of his mouth. I smell the bread. Our beatitude today talks about craving, this yearning, this longing, this desire for righteousness. So I want to ask you this morning, do we sense the presence of God in our life that makes us crave something on behalf of God? Do we have any kind of thought when we wake up in the morning that today God is yours? We say that verse, this is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. But how does that translate into the reality of when our feet hit the floor? Oh Lord, it's another day. Oh Lord, it's another day. Oh, hello, somebody home? Oh, how near to the heart of God. Oh, how enlarged our life will be if we hunger and thirst, crave for righteousness. Okay, so if that hunger and thirsting means this craving, then what is this word righteousness? As is the case often in the Beatitudes, the Greek word has several English meanings. And so we turn to one of three of those. One is that this word righteousness means personal goodness. In other words, those who crave personal goodness. Blessed are those. You'll be close to the heart of God. Your life will be enlarged if you wake up and go at each day craving to do good and to be good. So are we trying to do any better in our life? Are we intentional about that? Is there any kind of movement in which we make a commitment every day? Lord, thank you for this day, for the opportunity to go and be good, to go and do good. Such a craving comes from a loving God who has transformed us. I love the story of the facility, the steward of the facility who came and got the preacher and said, you need to come to the sanctuary. I don't know what this is about. So he took him to the sanctuary. And when they got to the sanctuary, there on the altar was a pile of clothes. And so they went over and they began to look at these clothes. There was a pair of corduroy pants there. There was a pair of tan suede boots. There was a belt. There was a white T-shirt that had obviously bloodstains on it. And then there was a note on the top that said, please listen to God, ... call, and there was a number. So the pastor went back to the office and immediately picked up the phone and called. He found himself talking to a 19-year-old. This 19-year-old began to tell the story of the night before. He was a homeless 19-year-old. He'd gotten into a fight with somebody on the street and almost beat him to death. And then he picked him up and took him to the emergency room because he was fearful that he might take his life, that he might have taken his life. When he made sure the guy was going to get good medical care and that he was going to be okay, he picked up his bedroll and what was left of his belongings and he began walking the streets. As he was walking the streets, he came upon a church. He tried the door was open. He found himself at the altar of this man's church. And there he told this pastor, he said, I was there praying, I was crying, I was screaming at God, I was saying, I don't know what's going on, I need a new life, I need for you to come and cleanse me and forgive me. And he said, all of a sudden, it happened. God showed up. And I know God was there. I felt Him in my presence and I felt cleaned. I felt like the burdens had been lifted from me. And at that moment, I felt so new. I felt ready for a new beginning. I had to undress and leave all that history right there on the altar. And I took out the only other set of clothes I had from my bedroll and put them on. And I went back out into the world determined to do good and to be good. I love that story. It makes me want to ask this question of us. When's the last time we came to the altar and undressed? No, not our clothes, our soul. When was the last time pride broke? Inside you and me, we could barely walk, much less crawl before God. We couldn't hardly look up because of the tears staining our cheeks, and yet we knew in the midst of that brokenness we needed Him. He was bigger than us, and we needed to be cleansed. We needed a new start. We needed for Him to wash us clean at that moment, and it required undressing our soul. Oh, how close to the heart of God. Oh, how large your life can become if you and I will crave to do good, to be good. I smell the bread. I smell the bread. There's a second Greek meaning of righteousness here. It's not only about doing good and being good. There is this second meaning of righteousness that, pray for me, church, this is hard because this one cuts through. This righteousness he's talking about is a call for justice. Oh, how close to the heart of God. Oh, how your life and my life will grow and become so big if we crave justice. Now, you know what I've determined? Justice is easy to holler for if it's for me, right? Oh, but officer, I've got all kinds of reasons I was speeding. Please show me mercy, right? Officer, you need to give that guy a ticket. He blew my doors off going down the road. I was just going to see my grandmama, and he's driving like an idiot. Give him a ticket. Give them justice, give me mercy. This kind of justice is when we see someone being taken advantage of physically. When we see someone being abused or bullied, we have to step in the gap, church. This is not a should I, shouldn't I? No. When we crave righteousness, we have to step in the gap. When we hear someone being abused verbally, When we hear someone being attacked with words, we have to step in the gap. It's wrong. See, that's justice. Justice says when we witness someone wielding power over someone, almost to the extent of abusive way of controlling someone, almost to the point where you think they're denigrating humanity. I wouldn't treat that person, I wouldn't treat my dog the way that person's being treated. You and I are the church and we have to step in because it's wrong. Here's one. When we hear someone telling a falsehood, when we hear someone telling a lie, we have to step in. Now, I wonder how many conversations in church that would change. You see, emotionally healthy spirituality says, if I'm in a conversation with you and you begin speaking something I know is not true, I have a choice at that moment. Stand in silence, which is like giving you permission to keep telling the lie. Or I get out of the conversation and say, friend, I can't be in this conversation with you. You might want to check your facts on that. You see, peace is not false peace. You go along to get along, you've just created false peace. Justice says we step in when it's wrong, because that's what it's like to crave righteousness. That's what it's like to do good and want to be good. The problem is, folks, that historically the church has been silent in many ways on justice because they've given that responsibility to the government. So we've politicized that which Jesus died for on the cross. Because it's a painful thing. Pray for me, church. This is hard. This is hard stuff right here. There's a man years ago who made a trip to New Orleans. He was a lawyer, and when he arrived there, something he saw broke his heart and turned his stomach. He was looking at something he knew was wrong. It was absolutely wrong. And then he found out what it was he was looking at. He was looking at a slave auction. People, humanity, were being sold for money. And so what he heard in that moment was the struggle above the going for price, the struggle of women screaming because they were losing their husbands, children screaming because they were being separated from families geographically, probably never to be seen again, all in the name of economic moving ahead. Beyond cruel in any of the description, to be sure. And the man thought to himself, if I ever get in the position to do something about this, I will. And he did. His name was Abraham Lincoln. And as you know, the stand he took against slavery. Now here's the problem. The church in the South wanted to keep slavery and used the Bible to rationalize it. To crave goodness is for you and I to be broken in our spirit, to know that at the foot of the cross it is level ground. It matters not. We can say this in our mind, but what are our actions when it comes to the color of skin, to where you live and what zip code? It is craving this goodness. Did you know that slavery was actually written into the first Declaration of Independence? Oh, you remember these key words. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Well, we could just pause right there. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, meaning what? Freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, the interesting thing is that in the Declaration of Independence, it then goes on to describe the injustices that were done by colonialism. In other words, they blamed it all on overseas. Did you know that in the original Declaration of Independence, there was a clause in there to strike down slavery? But it received such opposition from the South and the religious of the South, they took it out. Hello, church. Oh, let me just say, that wasn't the first time this had been done. In the Declaration of Independence, and I quote, it says, "He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us. He has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers," listen to this, "the merciless Indian savages." This is our Declaration of Independence, gang. This is our America. That in words like this, we have taken the humanity of a different race and thrown it down. And I want to say to you today, there are still opportunities for the church's voice to stand tall. I don't know about you. I need to smell the bread. I need to smell the bread. I need the power of Jesus Christ to help me fight for those who are on the margins of society, who did not get the breaks I got. I am not a self-made man standing before you now. I am not. I need to be the one who literally becomes the voice of Jesus Christ that says all men and women are made equal. And not for the sake of economy shall we talk down to them or set them aside. Whether it is slavery or American Indians or people who use abortion as just a wholesale means of birth control. Or people who sex traffic with children or adults. And folks, this is the place where God says, do you hunger and thirst for righteousness? Do you crave it? And I stand before you. I'm confessing before you. I'm asking God to break me so that I can smell the bread. And righteousness is not just about doing good and being good and justice. There is a final way, and that it has to do, the actual Greek literal meaning of righteousness is dikaiosun, which literally means to be set right with God and other people. So blessed, near to the heart of God, how large your life will be if you crave to be good, to do good, if you crave justice, if you crave to be right with God and one another. You may have heard about that man who prayed, Lord, I want to give myself to you. I surrender myself to you, especially in any advisory capacity. There's something about me that says the Lord doesn't need our help in an advisory capacity. But He needs us in a relational capacity. It's why He created you. It's why He created me. And it's why He blessed the church into being. To come love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love one another. It is the relational part of this beatitude. Are we craving? If so, here's the simple equation. If you're craving to be good and to do good, if you're craving justice, if you are craving to be in right relationship with God and one another, you'll be filled. Here's one word description of filled. You'll be content. You will not want. You and I will not want. And you see, that's an opposite message that the world gives us today. Because the world is always saying, no, you're not fully satisfied. We got more for you. Buy bigger. Buy better. We got more for you. So they create the discontent. And the Lord says, I'm the bread of life. Do you smell the bread? Pray with me. Lord, there are some hard things you say. And they're hard when it comes to us being broken. Come quickly, O God. Come quickly to be the bread of life, that you may fill us, that we will never be hungry again. We will be content. Come quickly, O God, let us drink from you, that we will never be thirsty again. Amen.